that Bangladeshi nationality is distinct from being Bengali. Debates around being authentically Bengali or whatever are not just pertaining to being Indian or Bangladeshi. We dig deeper, we can see that actually it's kind of about also what Bengali, Indian or Bangladeshi you are. So this reflects debates about secular values and religiously informed politics.
I just wanted you to reflect a little bit about your advert for recruiting your participants. When you advertise your project and saying, are you Bengali heritage? Already framing this like this, I wonder what kind of impact do you think this had in terms of who responded to this?
Did you observe the differences across generations? I told you, between migrants and their children, in the way the negotiations of Britishness, Bengali ethnicity or nationalism, and also I think there might be religious identity as well.
People from the global south in particular have been presented and constructed as being troublemakers, as being dangerous, as being un-European. So the memory or the diasporic identity, is it actual, is it imaginary, is it based on nostalgia, is it based on storytelling?
Sohrawardi is saying the united Bengal in divided India, and then Shyama Prasad Mukherjee wants divided Bengal in united India, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted divided Bengal in divided India, and Gandhiji wanted united Bengal in united India.
Initiative.
It's a wonderful initiative.
The Global South Network opened new horizons for judicial cooperations.
Global South Network provide a platform for meaningful dialogue and collaboration, fostering efforts to build a more equitable and resilient legal landscape.
GSN Network continues to expand areas of activity, further strengthening its impact and reach.
The universal concept of justice compels us to join our efforts, and this is, I believe, the forum for promoting the same goal.
Well deserved for the hectic activity you have made. I am astonished, I am amazed, I was impressed.
May I at the outset commend you, Dr. Ayad, for the immense work that you're doing in the GSN. The Global South Network is a much admired initiative.
كانت جزء لا يتجزأ من الدولة العثمانية.
We are being criticized for doing our job and for upholding the federal constitution. Like I have said in the past, I will not bend to such lame pressures and insinuations.
It's commendable. South Network focuses on all disciplines and regions, creating a bridge between academia, civil society, legal community, etc.
Quiero expresar mi sincero agradecimiento al Dr. Nauman Riyad.
Dr. Nauman Riyad, the founder and convener of the Global South Network. His visionary leadership has established a vibrant forum where judges, academics, and practitioners from around the world can share and exchange ideas. Initiatives like today's dialogue allow us to compare jurisprudence, share best practices, and develop common principles. This has the potential to contribute to transnational standards in procedure and enhance administrative law globally.
I would like to point out that Dr. Riyad's initiatives have not only enriched comparative judicial dialogue, have also fostered mutual understanding of the diverse challenges that courts face in safeguarding the rule of law and constitutionalism.
We can rule when we want in the cases which are brought to us.
by citizens and residents. In the EU, this openness of mind is increased by the fact we apply, in some cases, same norms from the EU treaties or the EU directives or regulations.
It's my pleasure to welcome you to the seminar in phase 4 of our international interdisciplinary PhD in Progress weekly seminar series organized by the Global South Network. Before we begin, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Nauman Rayat, lecturer in law at Leicester Law School and founder and chief convener of the Global South Network, for organizing and leading this weekly seminar series. I'm Dr. Taj Hashmi, and I will be chairing today's session. I taught at 7 universities in 3 continents, Australia, Asia, and North America. And I did my postdoc at Oxford and Monash in Australia. I'm joined by 2 discussants and a peer commentator. Dr. Garbin is the first discussant for today's session. He is a senior lecturer at the School of Social Sciences, University of Kent. Dr. Garbin's doctoral research examined the Bengali Muslim diaspora, focusing on the intersections of place, identity, and transnational politics through ethnographic fieldwork in London, Tower Hamlets, and Bangladesh in Sylhet. Second commentator, Dr. Aminul Hoque, MBE, is the second discussant for today's session. He's a lecturer in educational studies at the Department of Educational Studies, Goldsmith University of London. His research on third-generation Bangladeshis in East London formed the basis of this book, British Islamic Identity, published in 2015, an ethnographic study of cultural, national, religious, and gender identities. His wider work focuses on multiculturalism, identity, social justice, youth policy, race relations, and Islamic feminism. He's currently researching on the role of football as resistance to racism among Bangladeshi men in 1970s and 1980s, East London, and conducting life history interviews with elderly Bangladeshi women about their experiences during the 1971 War of Liberation. Anamika Das is the peer commentator for today's session. She is a PhD student at the Department of Anthropology, Tulane University, US. Her doctoral research explores how identity is constructed and negotiated through processes of language maintenance and shift. It also analyzes the key influences of governmentalism and nationalism in shaping identity and visibility among indigenous communities in the Chittagong Hill Tracts division of Bangladesh. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker of today's session, Anushka Chaudhuri, who is a PhD at the School of Sociology, Politics, and International Studies at the University of Bristol. Her PhD work explores nationalism, memory, migration, and boundary work among Britain's Bengali communities situated against a backdrop of globally rising nationalisms, reactionary politics, and religious revivalism. Today, Anushka will present part of her PhD project titled Everyday Identities in Flux, British Bengalis Negotiations of Nationalism, Ethnicity, and Social Boundaries. Anushka, you will have 30 to 35 minutes for your presentation, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of comments and questions from our discussants. If time permits, we will then open the floor for a 15-minute Q&A session with attendees. Anushka, the floor or the screen is all yours.
So my name's Anushka, as you know from that lovely introduction. I'm a recently submitted doctoral researcher in sociology at the University of Bristol, and I'm really excited to be here today as part of the PhD in Progress seminar series. Thank you, Noman, and the rest of the GSN for making this happen. I look forward to all of your questions and your feedback, particularly at this stage, considering I've just submitted, so it'll be really insightful in terms of career building as well. My thesis in and of itself explores the everyday constructions and articulations of Bengali identity among British Bengalis of common Bengali ethnicity and distinct Indian and Bangladeshi national identities. So I'm looking at two different diasporas together. And this presentation, with the time we have today, provides an overview of the socio-historical context and theoretical rationale informing the research process and the research focus. With the time that we have, I'll be providing a broad stroke coverage of some of the empirical findings that have emerged from my work. So theoretically, I bring together the studies of everyday nationalism, diaspora and boundaries to examine complex Bengali diasporas. I've just put it on the screen. You should be able to see the names of a couple of the theorists that I draw from and whose work I try and build upon. And I follow a couple of key assumptions, which I'm just going to talk you through as well. The first assumption, following everyday nationalism literature, is that the nation structurally informs ordinary people's everyday lives. So not just in overt political contexts, such as, immigration control or nationalist discourses, but also routine or ordinary or mundane contexts as well, whether that's eating, daily food, choices in dressing. The second assumption that I follow is that diaspora identities are processual, meaning that they're messy and constantly renegotiated, and they're informed by both the nation of origin as well as the nation of residence, whether these are real or imagined understandings. And the third assumption is that there are internal politics at play within communities. And these are like internal hierarchies and webs of power. So these can complicate notions of shared identities when minorities in a diasporic context can in and of themselves also be enacting the power and privilege of elites or majorities. And this is something that I do build upon in my thesis, because some everyday nationalism scholars, they use the word ordinary people, ordinary lives quite a bit to try and distinguish between state actors and non-state actors, which is useful. However, at times, by looking at ethnic majorities in nation states more often than not, there's also a tendency to assume, or risk assuming rather, that to be ordinary is to be non-elite, and that ignores the intersections of social class, gender, caste, privileges that individuals can hold, and other forms of discrimination that they can enact onto others that they seem as less fortunate, or so on. So I work with both Indian Bengalis and Bangladeshi Bengalis, addressing a population gap in the current field of British Bengali diaspora studies. The current focus is primarily on British Bangladeshis, which is really useful, especially in policy relevant work. It highlights asymmetries on a national demographic level. However, when we're looking at Bengalis as an expansive ethnic or cultural diaspora, by not including Indian Bengalis in the conversation, I think it can limit the understanding a little bit, particularly when we compare it to wider structures of power. So I try to address this and include it in my work as a sort of comprehensive analysis. To the next slide. So at the core of my argument is that Bengali identities are not fixed. They're plural, they're flexible, and they're shaped by both diasporic life in Britain and the long distance politics of India and Bangladesh. Diasporas don't just passively inherit national or other identities, they actively negotiate them. They may reproduce dominant ideas as well as reject them, and often they redo them or renegotiate them according to their daily context or to fit into their own lives, such as through the influence of social class, place, living in more or less diverse areas, and so on. So these choices and negotiations are shaped not only by direct or inherited experience of the nation of origin, but also by British structures like class, racialization, the immigration system. And recognizing this means seeing identity as something people do actively in their everyday life, rather than as a passive act of just a passive process of just being or inheriting an identity uncritically. So this outlook is supported by diaspora theorists who argue that diasporas are in process. And this negotiation also, as I'd mentioned really briefly a minute ago, this also reveals important asymmetries between Indian and Bangladeshi Bengalis in Britain that are shaped by histories of nationalism, religion, and economic inequality. The historical context I'll come to soon. Exploring these differences matters because it exposes how wider structures of power saturate and shape people's lives, meaning that shared ethnicity does not automatically equate to or lead to shared identity. In the same way, this also recognises the structural conditions necessitating diaspora's everyday strategies and their differences in being able to negotiate power structures. So in doing so, rather than just romanticising agency, acknowledging the conditions that are bringing forth such responsiveness and adaptation in the first place, recognising the forced nature of it. So in my thesis, I show internal diversities through 4 key examples. Number 1, ethnicity in everyday life. So I look at how everyday markers of Bengali ethnic identity, such as food, dress, and language, are expressed differently as shaped by social structures like class, gender, religion, and so on. The second example is competing nationalisms. So rather than the obvious distinction of being Indian or being Bangladeshi, which I do examine, I also dig a little deeper and examine different forms of nationalism within that. So whether somebody is more inclined to a secular national identity or a religiously informed one. I then zoom in a little bit further and examine internal hierarchies and boundaries to show different relations of power in in-group contexts. And in the fourth example, I look at intergenerational shifts, like changing relations to home and away, or dish bidish, and different styles of engagement with the nation between first, second, and third generation diasporas. So I absolutely cannot cover all of this in today's talk, so I will just give you a little bit of data. But first, to make sense of my focus, I'm just going to briefly sketch out the historical and political background of some of you will probably be familiar with this as well. So Bengal today spans Bangladesh and the eastern Indian state of West Bengal. And movement between these regions has historically carried language, culture, and local practices across borders. Yet the socio-political divisions or cleavages have long structured everyday life in Bengal. In undivided Bengal, power was concentrated among Hindu elites, particularly the so-called respectable folk called the phdlog and the zamindars or landowners. British colonial policies and reforms often actually consolidated these caste and class hierarchies, which worsened relations of power and internal dynamics, leading to the worsened marginalization of many Muslims, lower caste minorities, and working classes. Increasingly, tensions grew, and this eventually led to the 1905 first partition of Bengal, in into East and West Bengal. So I'll just bring that map back up here. This was then annulled in 1911 due to mass protests arising from growing Bengali nationalist consciousness, as well as Hindu nationalism, which spilled over into communal violence. So through the annulment of this first partition, relations of inequality in labour, in politics, they grew. And particularly with the different forms of nationalist sentiment going across then British India as well, there was a lot of political instability. Eventually, obviously I'm missing out a lot of things here, but this eventually led to the second partition of Bengal, or as it's better known, the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. And during this time, Bengal was split again. West Bengal went to India, and East Bengal became East Pakistan, which is today's Bangladesh. But discrimination, marginalization, persecution continued in the eastern and western wings of Pakistan. So the dominant West Pakistan state exerted a lot of force, economic marginalization, and eventually a 9-month-long war on its Bengali populations in then East Pakistan. This culminated in the 1971 Liberation War, which led to the creation of the emergence of the independent nation state of Bangladesh. Sorry, excuse me. So these three turning points, 1905, 1947 and 1971, these are all memorialized in modern Bengali history, and they continue to shape modern Indian and Bangladeshi Bengalis' national identities and understandings of their nations of origin, both at home and in the world. So both in India and Bangladesh and in diaspora. Today, Bengal's borders are increasingly militarized and religion is increasingly politicized. And this cross-border movement, which has historically been so normal, is not without risk. It's very, very difficult. This has produced two nationally distinct yet ethnically connected diasporas, Indian Bengalis and Bangladeshi Bengalis, who we can understand simultaneously as one diaspora in terms of ethnicity and culture, but also as separate ones in terms of nations and national identities. These histories and politics translate overseas into diaspora. So in Britain, these asymmetries that I've very briefly outlined, they do persist. So according to data, Indian migrants who are largely Hindu are often framed through the myth of the model minority, whilst Bangladeshis as a Muslim majority community often have to face greater challenges of surveillance, prevent policy, securitization. And this is also reflected in life opportunities and systemic inequalities, like Bangladeshis being disproportionately impacted by the COVID mortality rates and the ethnic pay gaps, whilst Indians are positioned more economically on par with white Britons. So following this, to be Bengali then is a very complex thing in many ways. In and of itself, being Bengali is being bordered by these various structures of nation, religion, class, caste, gender. So I query, following all of this, how do British Bengalis navigate the politics of India and Bangladesh on a long distance scale when they're so far away? When, if at all, are India, Bangladesh and their past and present politics relevant amongst diasporas when they navigate other duties, responsibilities, identities and other forms of structural discrimination overseas? So now I turn to everyone's favourite part, methods. Jokes aside, I am going to skim through this because it might be a little bit boring. I've put up on the slide a picture of a copy of my call for participants that I uploaded or shared during recruitment. So I conducted 50 combined semi-structured and narrative interviews with 48 participants, 2 of whom had follow-up interviews due to insufficient time on the first day of interviewing. Most of the interviews were done on Zoom, though I also used WhatsApp video calls, the telephone, and I did several in person as well. And the places I did them in person were Leicester, Birmingham, Essex, and Bristol. The interviews were largely conducted in English, with some Bengali mixed language interviewing, which required me to do translation, which I did myself from Bangla to English. And I did my coding and data visualization through NVivo software. In terms of my methodology, I was influenced by some participatory methods and encouraged participants to choose their own pseudonyms. So naming was very political. I found that regardless of participants' individual religiosity or theistic inclination or disinclination, most of them actually selected a pseudonym for themselves that was religiously neutral and more culturally coded. So in one example, a Sylheti Bangladeshi participant chose to name herself Moina, which translates to little bird as a term of endearment for women and girls in Sylheti. And she rationalized choosing this term, this name Moina, because, to quote, little birds keep chirping no matter what's going on. And I just thought it'd be important to highlight that. I completed my fieldwork 1 year before the overthrowing of the former Hasina-led regime. And a lot of the participants, including my participant Moina, indirectly or directly referenced nationalist politics, such as state censorship and hardening politics. So I really liked that quote, so I just thought I'd share that with you. But now let's jump in with a little bit of data that I actually found as well through my fieldwork. So whilst I explore nationalism or everyday nationalism and ethnicity, amongst other things, I avoided using these terms during fieldwork to see how participants themselves would describe themselves. And I also didn't really want to use leading language. So I tended to use words that I considered more neutral, like culture and so on, to leave it quite open to interpretation. Still, ethnicity emerged as a significant, though contested, way that ordinary Bengali participants framed themselves. Language, food, and dress surfaced as the three main ways that participants experienced and performed their Bengali identities or ethnicities in everyday life. These practices linked them to their Bengali heritage and to their nations of origin, but also to one another in certain contexts. So, say in cultural organizations or in mixed diasporic landscapes, this was possible. So one participant, Aisha, she's a 41-year-old Sylheti Bangladeshi from Surrey. She describes experiencing her Bengaliness on a near daily basis through food. And she was really happily telling me about how her everyday sort of Bengali cuisine is shaped by Sylheti regional produce and recipes. So she enjoys or remembers flavors of sour citrus fruit called shatkora, or shutki, which is fermented dried fish. At the same time as that, she's exchanging recipes with her Indian Bengali friend, and they're both learning about one another's similar yet different cuisines and preferences that have shaped their everyday ethnicity. In another way, the cultural blueprint of the pre-independence polymath Rabindranath Tagore also persists today, and his poetry informs both India and Bangladesh's national anthems. His legacy as a Nobel laureate from the 18th to 19th century Bengal Renaissance, a period of cultural awakening, continues to mark Bengali culture to this day, leading many to see it as entwined with cultural capital. So just to give you an insight into the continued salience and significance of him and his work, Deepa, a 56-year-old Indian woman told me that she actually turns to his writings for philosophical guidance, which just shows his continued significance across borders. Excuse me. But if ethnicity is salient, so is nationalism. So the nation does intermittently rear its head in everyday life. Arpita, a 52-year-old Bangladeshi woman from East London, was happily telling me about Tagore, but she also told me, I'm reading out a quote now in a second, that Indian Bengalis think that they own Rabindranath Tagore. And this highlights how cultural icons can become sites of boundary marking, and how even today, so many years later, the past is still relevant. Her comment directly goes back to the undivided era when Hindu elites dominated Bengal's cultural and political scenes and marginalized many Muslims, working classes and marginalized caste folk. So we can see that these ideas and memories are inherited, and they continue today, even if they're not directly experienced. Furthermore, contentious ideas of legitimacy and authenticity emerged as an invisible boundary that participants laboriously negotiated. Both Indian and Bangladeshi participants linked their national identities to claims of being true Bengalis, quote unquote, but they also used these national identities to draw boundaries between being Bengali and being Bangladeshi. So while studies by, for instance, John Eade and Claire Alexander show that British Bangladeshis often describe themselves ethnically as Bengali, and my findings do reaffirm this, that the terms Bengali, Bangladeshi and Muslim are identity categories that are often used interchangeably but also contextually negotiated. I also found there to be a frequent distinction made where being Bengali was an identity shared with Indians, whilst being Bangladeshi carried a more territorial, historical and often religiously shaped meaning for my participants. So sometimes, following the literature as well, national difference or distinction can be beneficial or favoured when ethnicity is shared. So Momita, a 28-year-old solicitor from London, she challenges these top-down assertions and epistemic injustices. She stresses that Bangladeshi nationality is distinct from being Bengali. And I've put a big chunky quote on the screen. She locates this difference in the strong Islamic tradition of the eastern part of Bengal, which forms Bangladesh. And crucially, she also locates this in the experiences of anti-Bengali persecution and the Liberation War of 1971. And this gives Momita and many other Bangladeshi participants a sense of being legitimately Bengali, being legitimately Bangladeshi. Following the literature, we can link this to what Tim Edinson regards as a national habitus, or what Hoque calls a national cultural capital, where through engaging with and reproducing national identities or discourses or national events, an overall sense of nationness or nationhood, some people may feel more legitimately national than others. So following this outlook, we can suggest that perhaps what Ali Riaz regards as the bloody birth of Bangladesh in 1971, spatially and temporally frames a Bangladeshi Bengali identity premised upon fighting for the right to Bengali identity, which in comparison Indian Bengalis might identify more symbolically with, due to not having to fight for this on a life and death basis, especially not in recent memory. However, debates around being authentically Bengali or whatever are not just pertaining to being Indian or Bangladeshi. We dig deeper, we can see that actually it's kind of about also what Bengali, Indian or Bangladeshi you are. So this reflects debates about secular values and religiously informed politics, which have often, through the top down, come to be binarized. And this emerges following the cementation of everyday belief as well as religious cleavages, which have come to suggest that a religious culture is also a national culture and vice versa. So a lot of the national or nationalist discourses reproduced or rejected by my participants pertained to secularism versus religious majoritarianism, which created a distinction between what the nation is and what it was assumed to be. We see this notably in India, which was founded as a secular state in 1947, though unfortunately it has not upheld these values consistently since the 50s. This was an issue long before the Modi-led BJP government, because even the secular founding party, Indian National Congress, relied on Hindu symbolism and theology to represent the majority population. So several of my Indian participants struggled to place their strong Bengali identity and West Bengali regionalism within the context of the wider Indian nation, particularly with a state and national government that pushes for Hindi language dominance and Hindu religiosity. Yet a few of my Indian Hindu participants did also consciously or unconsciously reproduce some Hindu nationalist discourses showing the mainstreaming of Hindu majoritarianism and nationalism in everyday life, both in India and overseas. So, for instance, one participant considered critiques of Indian state Islamophobia to be unwarranted, and they cited some potentially questionable statistics about India having a larger Muslim population than Pakistan and Bangladesh, not taking into consideration the size of national populations and countries in and of themselves. And another participant interpreted polytheism in Hinduism as supposedly making Hindus vulnerable to religious conversion by Christians and Muslims. But at the same time as this, the idea, the foundational vision of India as a secular and multicultural nation remained meaningful. Several of my participants stated that India was meant to be secular, and they reproduced first Prime Minister Nehru's slogan of unity and diversity consciously. We also see debates around secularism and Islamic religiosity in the oscillations between secular and Islamic constitutions and national culture since Bangladesh's conception. And in recent years, this has notably been between the Awami League and the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, respectively the secular and religiously informed parties. Niku, a 28-year-old Bangladeshi woman from London, explains this has led many British Bangladeshis to believe that they have to choose between being either religious or cultural, not both. And she attributes this of being either staunchly cultural or staunchly religious, as though picking sides, to be reflecting migrants' attempts to hold on to familiar ideas and ideals when remaking home elsewhere. Russell, a 43-year-old man from Sussex, finds there to be stronger Muslim identity and everyday belief amongst British Bangladeshis than in Bangladesh, and he provides a commentary of his friends and family back home and here in Britain, his second home. Cumulatively, these differences in what is assumed to be correctly being Bangladeshi can lead to some intra-diasporic contentions around what being Bangladeshi and Muslim looks like in practice. A male participant in his 50s called Brishti, which translates to rain, participates in national events with his family, like Ekushi. Now Ekushi is an annual commemoration of the lives lost during the 1952 language movement. And as well as engaging with these national events, he also practices Islam. But by engaging with the national event Ekushi or the cultural festival of Poila Boishak, which is Bengali New Year's, or when using flowers to show respect for the lives lost during independence efforts, Brishti and his family were actually marginalised by several members of the wider British Bangladeshi community in his area for supposedly not being Muslim enough, as their practices were likened to Hindu worship. And this raises many problematic questions and assumptions of who and what Bangladeshi is. Going back to my methods, a few years ago, I read Edward Adamolo's 2023 article titled "Birds of a Feather Don't Always Flock Together." And this was a fantastic example of critical reflexivity, especially as conducting research as an ethnic insider. So as a half Bengali researcher myself, I'm an ethnic insider, but as someone of Indian and nominal Hindu background, when engaging in interviews with my Bangladeshi Muslim participants, I'm also an outsider. And it was these specific contexts in which what I considered background identities were brought to fore, which I found really important. So when Brishti was telling me about his experiences with religion and culture, he was actually urging me to not get the wrong idea about Muslims. And his comment drew attention to my positionality, as well as the unequal burden that many Muslims face when correcting, for instance, non-Muslims' understandings about Islam and Muslims. And this is something that Redcliffe et al. Regard as the burden of conviviality in their 2022 article, which also is fantastic, and I suggest you read if you haven't. So this, again, conscious of the time, this underscores that even when ethnicity, language, culture, when they're all shared, other intersections like class and religion can and do shape everyday experiences, but they can also act as asymmetries which might impede mutual identification. So this positions Hindu majority Indian Bengalis and Muslim majority Bangladeshi Bengalis as distinct diasporas despite their overlapping heritage. So in summary, being Bengali in Britain is shaped by many things, including shared ethnicity, as well as national and other socio-political distinctions, meaning that many Indian and Bangladeshi Bengalis might feel similar, yet also different. And such internal diversities can sometimes harden into divisions, reflecting long-distance nationalisms. But everyday agency in diaspora also allows people to transgress these and redo them. And these are very messy, often contradictory negotiations. But they show how the histories of separation and reunification and reseparation in the 19th century, 20th century, still echo today. My thesis digs into these dynamics a lot more to show how British Bengalis, as an ethnically linked yet nationally distinct diaspora, navigate their place in Britain. So yeah, thank you.
We now invite David. David, if you would like to comment.
Yes, thank you very much, Anushka. I'm aware that we don't really have a lot of time, so I'm just going to be brief here. I thought that was a very interesting presentation, fascinating really, that you are looking at both diasporas through the eyes of the others, so to speak. So I think that's quite innovative. I don't think that has been done before. Even Alexander's works and others, they haven't really done this. So I really like the ways in which you deal with all of these boundaries in space, but also in time. I think that the idea of time and history is quite present in your work, and perhaps it's something you may want to explore more. Perhaps you have done this before, framing it around sort of a more post-colonial framework or view. I like your use of this sort of micro interactions around food, which are quite intimate, and also it's about creating homes and in the everyday. So I think that's quite relevant in the ways in which you frame a diaspora. I had a quick, very, very provocative question. If you can return to your methodology slide, where I just wanted you to reflect a little bit about your advert for recruiting your participants. When you talk about when you advertise your project and saying, are you the Bengali heritage, Indian or Bangladeshi? I find it quite an interesting way of perhaps already framing this. And I mean, no positions is already framing this like this. I wonder what kind of impact do you think this had in terms of who responded to this, and And also, in terms perhaps more, theoretically speaking, I mean, in terms of what Brubaker calls groupism, the sort of, okay, how do we, what do we do with these boundaries? Are they categories? Are they experience in interaction? Are they, performances? Are they connected to claims and so on? So how do you view this group that you have created here? I mean, you talked about how, there's tensions between, obviously ethnicity and heritage and so on. What do you think this has created in terms of who responded to this, and how do they relate to this already, identity sort of category you have created? I mean, not now you have created, but do you know what I mean? That is presented here. Because I'm thinking about, Bangladeshis in East London and how they may relate to this, for example, particular groups or people I've been working with that may, have a lot to say about these things. And also another question, very briefly, you talked about Ekushi, you talked about Bosha Kimela. I'm just interested in the ways in which perhaps Indian Bengalis might be interested or might be attending these events. Is there any, have you observed any, boundary crossings in terms of these particular events from the other side of the line, so to speak?
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, David, for the comments. Anushka, if you allow, let's go quickly to Anamika, collect the comments. And Amin has just joined us, so we have to go to him as well. So, Anamika, over to you.
Thank you, Anushka. It's really a fascinating presentation, and how you connected the broader political identity with the national identity. It's really fascinating. I have a quick question. I know I have so many questions because I'm also working on the field, but for the time. You basically worked on the first generations Bengalis or second and third generations Bengali heritage community. So I just wanted to know, is it like just only for the first generation or second and third generation Bengali heritage community? Because their experiences might be different based on the first and second generations. And also I have a quick question about did you observe the differences across generations? Like I told you, like between migrants and their children, like in the way the negotiations of Britishness, Bengali ethnicity or nationalism, and also I think there might be religious identity as well. So I just wanted to the interconnectivity of these identities.
Thank you, Anamika, for the comments. Dr. Aminul, please switch on your mic and camera and share your thoughts.
But I caught some of the conversation. I've read the candidates' presentation slides as well. Very insightful, very useful, very important, very relevant, especially in the current global climate that we live in, where people from the global south in particular have been presented and constructed as being troublemakers, as being dangerous, as being un-European. I think more stories and more research like this needs to happen. My thoughts and comments are around the complexity of diaspora and how diaspora operates in the Bengali or Bangladeshi or Bengal in this research, for example, the Bengali communities. So is it actual? Is it imaginary? Is it based on nostalgia? So I know, for example, my own experience of my connection with Bangladesh revolves around childhood memories of long summer vacations, frequent visits for weddings and family functions. For my father built a house in the village, for example. So spending long summers like that in my early years and my teenage years. But that sort of actual relationship has now ceased. It stopped. Partly it's a generational issue. So, for example, I now go to Bangladesh far less frequent than I used to, and of course, my children vis-a-vis are not going at all. So the memory or the diasporic identity, is it actual? Is it imaginary? Is it based on nostalgia? Is it based on storytelling? I know part of the whole imagination of being a Bengali or Bangladeshi revolves a lot around folk stories and oral storytelling told to us by our parents and grandparents. And of course, that tradition is slowly dying, very, very unfortunately. So that's my first point, my first question. And also, I've got a two-pronged question around the role of language. Of course, we know culture and identity lives through the spoken language, and Bengali or Sylheti Bengali, in my instance, is being less spoken by the younger generations. And at some point, I know when I was growing up, Bengali language classes was an everyday staple after school during the weekends, but it's something that's not happening amongst the younger generations. And linked to the language is the question of religion, the role of Islam in this diasporic international identity, especially now with the new Bangladesh after the summer of 2024 and the emerging of the Islamic or Islamist parties in Bangladesh. What role is Islam playing in this diasporic identity? So these are some of my thoughts and comments just in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Aminul, for useful comments. Anushka, you have all your comments, 5 minutes if you would like to respond to these comments. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Those were really interesting questions. So I'll try and go in order. So the first comment about groupism, I definitely see that. I found it almost difficult to avoid positioning identities or identity categories as groups or reifying them, which is why I tried to use more open language. But I definitely see how during the process of recruitment, by in the poster in brackets saying Indian or Bangladeshi, when next to the word Bengali, I've then also asserted from the top down as the researcher who I deem as credible or applicable to participate in my work. So that's a really good comment. I found actually that through that poster, I got a lot more engagement through my call for participation. And people were like, initially, before using a poster, people would say, I'm mixed heritage, I'm half Bangladeshi, or I'm half Indian Bengali, can I take part? Or I'm not born there, I'm third generation, can I take part? Or I'm Indian, but I'm Bengali, can I take part? So I actually found that even though I did risk reproducing groupist language by sort of making that distinction clear from my participants anyway, on like a ground level, I did get positive feedback, which is why I've also tried to engage in my work with like the sort of contradictory nature of all these terms, because so many of them were critical of things like ethnicity. Again, a word I avoided using myself, yet they viewed it in so many different ways. They were saying, it's a social construct, but then they were equally talking about it as though it had biological reality. So it was a very contradictory, very interesting experience. Yeah, and I've just seen Aminul, your comment in the chat. I also feel like maybe by also saying Indian or Bangladeshi in my recruitment, I also considered where does that leave people who sort of identify or as neither or live elsewhere, especially given the nature of the multiple partitions. So I had Sylheti participants who were both Bangladeshi and Indian. Obviously, the Indian, due to being so much of a smaller community, the Indian Sylheti diaspora participants were much, much smaller, but they nonetheless could relate to the Indian Sylhetis could relate to the Bangladeshi Sylhetis through language and food and practices like that. But due to inability to speak in it and speaking in the standard register instead, were unable to form some bonds. I hope that answers the first question. The second one was, how do Indian Bengalis interact with Bangladeshi Bengali events, if at all? So I found there to be some sort of like mutual respect, and that was explicitly stated during my interviews. So one of my participants, Bani Rupa, who I mentioned just off the top of my head, who I mentioned during the presentation, she was really saying how like it's so good how Bangladeshis have held on to their culture and like sort of made a name for themselves in Britain, because Indian Bengalis as a much smaller community haven't managed to do that yet, and they've not managed to like intergenerationally settle in as much and form the networks. I had some Indian Bengali recent migrants who have now lived here for like multiple years, but they purposefully at the time of migration chose to move to East London so they could be in the Bengali settings and sort of be around the language, the food, the culture, the religion, shared or not, the religions common in the area. So yeah, I feel like there was some, they were navigating it in like an everyday sense, but only like I think one of my participants really actively participated in the nationalist events. So one of my participants, Uma, she's in her 50s, and like many of my Indian Bengali participants, she had mixed heritage of being, so she was Indian Bengali, but her parentage was from the other side of the border, in what is now Bangladesh. So she actually really struggled with particularly her matching her Bengali identity and her Indian national identity. She went on holiday with her family in 2019 to Bangladesh, to Dhaka, and unintentionally arrived during Ekushi celebrations, during nationalist celebrations, and she absolutely loved it. And she was like, she was from West Bengal, and so she was saying it was so similar but so exuberant, where it was almost like the norm to be Bengali, or it was celebrated to be Bengali. So she really actively like took part. She now incorporates stuff like that in her work and does like cross community work. So there was a lot of stuff showing the possibility to communicate across the different diasporas. But I also acknowledge that my Indian Bengali sample was like half the size of my Bangladeshi Bengali sample. So this might not be reflective for had I had a much larger sample or like a 50-50 sample. But equally, because it comes about Bengali ethnicity, I think there is a prospect for these commonalities to be sort of like configured as a connection in diaspora. Anamika, your question about mixed generations. So yeah, it was, I recruited across the board basically. I was conscious of my word of diaspora as well, because I know a lot of people don't identify as that. Some people identify as being migrants, or these are very political terms, and they just might say, you know, I'm Bengali, I'm from XYZ. So I was conscious about that. But definitely through recruiting across different first, second, third generations, it did highlight different relations to home, to one another. So some people, so say first generations had almost to use the wording that Aminul used about real or imagined and how it was done. Some first generations, you could say, had a real relationship to the nation. They went back to West Bengal or to India or to Bangladesh more frequently. So they were more like in touch. But at the same time, so many first generations still had a nostalgia about how they imagined home, and so many of them imagined it as stuck in the past, as if it hadn't changed from when they had left, which was then an understanding that was then inherited by their children, say second generations. Yet some second generations went lots of times back home and engaged with their family there, or the fashions there, or even if they weren't visiting, because of media and the internet, they were watching movies, staying updated with the music, of course being engaged with political events, seeing what's going on, being critical of it, and therefore they were actually having a more real or up-to-date understanding of home or their nations of origin than actually their parents at times. So it was hard to say that with each generation, this is what the relationship to home was like, because it wasn't determinate at all. It was just an influence, because you had first generations who felt like there was no longer an emotional pull, whereas you had third generations who were really worrying about how to maintain whatever connection was remaining. With regards to language, so a lot of these things I go into a lot more detail than I have today, given the time that we have. But language is a big one. And in my first empirical chapter, where I set the scene of ethnic commonalities or the different ways that shared markers of identity are experienced, language is a key one. There were language, especially for Siletis, was really interesting, because there was this whole debate: is it a dialect or is it a language? And obviously this really links back to classed stereotypes about regions as well, about that persist in both sides of the border, of whether the standard language of Bangla it's sort of like respectable, high class, status giving, versus regional dialects that are seen in comparison as inferior. So I saw that there were some continuity of these attitudes from India and Bangladesh here in Britain, but at the same time, given the migration patterns to Britain, so many of British Bangladeshis are actually of Sileti heritage. Some of these traditional outlooks, say pertaining to language and what's respectable, what's not, didn't have as much of a relevance here. So where in Bangladesh or in West Bengal, talking in like a regional dialect might be seen as less respectable or more working class or rural, here it wasn't seen as much, because so many of the people were speaking that dialect or language anyway, if that makes sense. So some of these tropes or ideas were subverted. But this is something I explore in a paper that I've got currently under review, about sort of like a regional distinction between Sileti Bangladeshis and non-Sileti Bangladeshis. So this is something, again, that I unpack more elsewhere, and hopefully will have a publication for one day. I also acknowledge the role of Islam in language, or the changing of language. So my participants talks a lot about, say, the rising use of Arabic terms rather than Bengali terms in everyday life, or even in non-religious contexts as well. So I found that really, really interesting. But I know there are some other people like Dr. Fatima Regina from DMU who have gone into this a lot more. And she's got an article called from something about the transition from Baha'i to Aki, which was really interesting. So I also recommend reading that if you haven't. So I'm conscious of the time, but I hope I've answered everyone's questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anushka, for the response. I think we are pretty much over the time. Taj, would you?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I've got just 2 or 3 comments and small question. You have classified that different immigrants or diaspora population into national, religious, ethnic, gendered, and class. I think possibly you think that linguistic minorities should be grouped together with ethnic. You possibly didn't draw a line between ethnic and religious, linguistic. But I think there is a slight difference, and we can always say linguistic and ethnic things are slightly different. They are not the same. You may take it, may not take it, just my suggestion. And I'm fascinated by the cartoon you have shown us from the Hindustan Standard. Although this is my area of study, I did my PhD on partition, how East Bengal became East Pakistan. That was my PhD thesis, Greater Bengal, United Bengal, Divided Bengal. I'm aware of the debates and I'm aware of the content of the cartoon that Sohrawardi is saying the United Bengal in Divided India, and then Shyama Prasad Mukherjee wants Divided Bengal in United India, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted Divided Bengal in Divided India, and Gandhiji wanted United Bengal in United India. So 4 different streams, but they didn't work. But that was good as a historical background. I've got just one comment. There is a slight difference between Indian Bengali and Bangladeshi Bengali diaspora population anywhere in the world, because Indian diaspora, Bengali or whatever ethnic group they belong to, they are primarily, they think they're Indians first, and then their Bengali or Bangladeshi identity recedes to the background. And again, from Calcutta or Tripura or other parts of India, those migrated to Britain, they can be classified into 2 groups, the Ghoti and Bengal. The West Bengali immigrants and the Bangladeshi immigrants who once crossed the border into West Bengal. So they have become diasporas in a way twice. They migrated twice. For example, me, I came from Assam to East Pakistan, then East Pakistan to Canada. So I became a diaspora, but again integrated in Bangladesh, then again came from there to Canada. So there are many West Bengalis who are actually, it was not a push factor, it was rather a pull factor from Britain, more job opportunities, better economic, social opportunities. But for many Bangladeshis who came here as economic immigrants, they ran away from the country, or political persecution. A new government comes in and the supporters of previous government are marginalized and they are forced to leave, and many of them leave with producing fake documents that they are wanted back at home, they will be persecuted, they will be killed. So there is a slight difference. But again, one big difference is the West Bengali or Bengali immigrants from Tripura and Assam to Britain or America. They're far more educated, professional, slightly better off than Sylhetis and those who came from Bangladesh. And I'm very glad for being invited here. Thank you all.
Great. All right. So thank you, Anushka, for your insightful presentation. Project clearly appeals to make a valuable contribution to the broader literature on nationalism and identities. Many thanks to Dr. Garbin, Dr. Hoque, Dr. Taj, Anamika for their excellent feedback, and to everyone who attended the session. The Global South Network warmly welcomes PhD students from any discipline and any part of the world to share their projects and receive interdisciplinary feedback. Anyone interested in presenting their work or participating in a session can contact me at leicleaguegsn@gmail.com. Same time next week, let's meet our next guest speaker, Silas Boye, PhD candidate, Faculty of Law, Western University, Canada, who will present their PhD project titled Healthcare in the Digital Age, Approach to Medical Errors and Negligence Regulation in Nigeria on 1st of October 2025 from 3 to 4 UK time. Until then, take care, look after yourself, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.